Perhaps the greatest spell cast upon the human consciousness is the one that free will is simply an illusion. So today, I'm going to explain why free will is real, how we can access more free will, and why people think that free will is only an illusion. In my video, Fate and Free Will Explained, I talk about how there are different layers of reality that are governed by a different set of laws. So with that, we have the lowest layer of this reality being governed by more laws and therefore more karma than the higher levels of reality that we would be able to access if we start using and acknowledging our free will. So what this means is that some people aren't having access to the same amount of options, the same amount of timelines, the same amount of higher choices that would ultimately allow them to create a destiny and reach that destiny. And that's because our reality isn't one-fold. Our reality is multifold, meaning that it is immersed in all potentials that are contained within this dimension. So if all of the potentials that are contained within this dimension already exist, and if they all already have a past, a present, and a future trajectory laid out in front of them, then that means that no matter what we align ourselves with, no matter how much free will we access, and no matter how much free will we use to make our choices, it will always look like it was predetermined, because all options and all potentials already exist. What we're doing is simply accessing the potential for that reality. So what we're doing, what our job in all of this is when it comes to free will, is that we align ourselves with those timelines where that version of ourselves was the one that we brought into reality. Or that version of ourselves was the one we became out of all of the different versions of ourselves we could have made choices to become. So imagine that every version of yourself already exists, but that we don't experience them all. We experience the version of ourselves that we gave the most attention to and made the most actions and choices to become. Your choices now are already activating future versions of yourself. If you'd like to understand this better, you can watch my video, How to Jump Timelines. So if all potentials already occur within this dimension that are native to this dimension, what I mean by native to this dimension is that are we able to manifest flying instantaneously by growing wings? Maybe, but we'd probably be in a more malleable dimension, one that would be like the fifth dimension. Within this dimension, there's certain sets and there's certain conditions. So those conditions we could look at are predetermined and are therefore agreed upon when we enter this reality or when we enter this dimension. We're specifically entering it and agreeing into certain limitations. And those limitations are what we would call predetermined. So within the predeterminedness of this dimension, now from there, we start getting even more limited. And what I mean by more limited is we start choosing karma, or sometimes we start unconsciously choosing karma. If you'd like to know what I mean by unconsciously choosing our karma, you can watch my video on that titled, This is Where the Soul Goes After Death. So within the limitations and within the construct of this third dimension, now we still have a sea of potentials, a sea of possibility, but they're within the parameters of this third dimension. Now, when we have karma, that creates what we could consider more limitations or more predetermination. So we have our genetics that are predetermined. We have our socioeconomics, one could say, are predetermined. We have our biology predetermined. We have many factors that go into our predetermination, aka our karma, And so we believe that because there's too many variables that are predetermined, there's too many limitations that are set as the parameters, that means that we have no free will, because even if we do make choices that are empowering or positive, that there was already going to be planned that choice to be made because our genetics, or because our hormones, or because our socioeconomics, because our you fill in the blank would have made that choice for us. So basically that means that we have no free will because there was too many predetermined factors, or too many things that were outside of our conscious control in our environment to even call it free will. Which means now we have to start actually defining what is free will. This would mean that the majority of people who believe that free will is an illusion are defining free will from a very warped and high expectation standard of what free will means. They're like, oh, you can't shapeshift into a giraffe? Oh, you have no free will. And instead, free will in mysticism is known as something so precious that it actually starts off merely as something that is meek and only a potential, nothing that is more than just this small potential within all of us that needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be recognized first in order for it to really grow and become stronger. So if we don't ever acknowledge our free will, then we won't ever access more of it. It's kind of like play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. So if you play the game of I don't have free will, then you're going to win more no free will. But if we start acknowledging what we do have conscious choice within, what we will notice is that that's going to develop a feedback loop. So even though we're not on our own in anything, and therefore not in complete, absolute control of everything, which is what they're calling free will, and that's not. What we do have free will over is our access to choice in any moment. And yes, there's a sea of potentials of choice that then get narrowed in. And when they get narrowed in, they're going from potential and pure sea of possibility, and they're going in one step, now turning into probability, okay? So probability is more limiting than possibility. So when we go in one step, now we're in probabilities. What am I probably going to choose based off of the environment I'm in, based off of my options, based off of everything that is predetermined? What am I probably going to choose? And then that folds in on itself, or what the quantum mechanics calls collapses into itself, one more stage, and that is the narrowing in of those probabilities. So it goes from possibility to probability, and then from probability, it just stays there until it collapses into the choice, until it collapses into that action, that reality that was created. And it's doing that multiple times per second. So multiple times per second, we are having possibility turn into probability, and then from probability turn into reality. And that's just happening so many times per second that we would not even be able to consciously comprehend it with our brain. I'm so glad for that. So with that, always going from possibility to probability to actuality, which is known as the wave function. It's known as collapsing reality from the wave function into the particle. With that, we're not in control of all of that. what we're doing with our free will is becoming more aware. So it starts off, our free will starts off as this little meek potential. If we don't pay enough attention to it, if we scoff at it, if we mock it, it won't grow. But if we start becoming more aware, if we start having more knowledge, those create something very important for the growth of our free will. And what one could say, all of mysticism is truly trying to get us to recognize and to develop. And what that creates when we become more conscious, we become more aware, and we seek more knowledge, is that creates discernment. And discernment now goes from small amount of free will, this little seed of it, this potential. Oh, and does that now create way more free will? So typically this is where people get the concept that there is no free will and that it's an illusion. It's because time has already taken place before we even made that conscious choice. They say that they have measured it to 300 milliseconds before we make a choice. The subconscious already selected that for us. And because this present moment right now is always a few seconds behind and in the past, then everything that's being played out in this present moment cannot actually come from the decisions and the conscious actions and choices that we made in it, because there is a time delay. And so since academia and other schools of thought, but mainly it's academia where this is coming from, because academia is able to perceive and measure the fact that we in this present moment are actually taking place a little bit with a time delay in the past. We believe that the subconscious mind has already selected every choice beforehand. So therefore, we are just playing out the actions. We are playing out the choices of what was already selected. And because of that, there is no free will. So I want to first make that very clear. It's that this time delay that has been measured is what I am calling that wave function collapse, from possibility into probability, and from probability into the present moment. Besides this time delay we experience, the other best argument for there being no free will comes from particle physics. Scientists state that because there were already factors that have measurable behaviors and therefore can be determined, that this created something called initial conditions. And the initial conditions are the particles that make up our brain and body. So if these particles that make up our brain and our body behave in a stable, predictable, and even measurable way, then we are merely the vehicle that plays out their fate. On top of these initial conditions, particle physics gets super harmonic and takes it one step further. They also go as far back as the Big Bang and say that because there was a Big Bang that set all cause and effect into motion, we are already determined because our actions, our thoughts, our emotions came from causes that already set us into motion, and we are playing out the reaction of those causes. They don't even stop there. They prove that even if you were to act chaotically, which in this case means if you were to act unpredictable, that even chaos is deterministic, because chaos is still from those initial conditions. What this means is that even if you do access your free will, and that produces random jumps in timelines that they call chaos or unpredictability, then it will still be predetermined, because even chaos still came from the initial conditions of the cause and effect from the past. Therefore, anything you do, no matter how random it looks, was a part of conditions already set in motion long before the present moment came into being. What they are missing is a better model of reality, a model that goes beyond the particle and understands that there are timelines already in existence to play out every choice we make. And all of these timelines have a past, a present, and a future trajectory already created. In fact, this is where we get deja vu from, and this is where we get the Mandela effect from. So, what we would have to do from there is define free will. When I am talking about how we have free will, I'm certainly not talking about only our conscious mind, only our ego acting in that immediate moment. I would never consider that to be what I'm referring to as free will, and mysticism surely isn't referring to that as free will. In my video, The Superconscious Mind Explained, I talk about how the superconscious mind is the generator of this experience, and how then from there we have two other brains or two other minds, the subconscious, and then we have our ego consciousness. So we're a part of a trinity within consciousness. If we're only looking at the last part of that trinity within consciousness, and we're holding that last part of the ego waking life mind solely responsible for what we call free will, no one is saying that. What I define as free will actually has to do with a feedback loop. The feedback loop is our waking life mind, our conscious mind, takes in its environment. Let's say it takes in knowledge that it did not have priorly. And it takes that knowledge in, and now it becomes more aware. Well, that awareness gets put into its subconscious mind, and it develops a feedback loop. We don't only develop a feedback loop with our subconscious mind where we're taking in knowledge and our subconscious mind is now organizing it. It's now being marinated and immersed inside the subconscious and repatterning it, or what we could believe as reprogramming it. So the conscious mind and the subconscious mind work together in a feedback loop. And over time, that creates a version of ourselves. A version of ourselves that is more conscious. So, with this version of ourselves that's creating a feedback loop, what's that doing when it's taking in more awareness, more knowledge from its environment, and therefore repatterning and reprogramming the subconscious mind with that? Well, that's called developing more discernment. So, I'll give you an example about how discernment will make us have more free will. If I'm presented with 3 options in front of me, and I believe that I have to choose one of those 3 options because I am not aware and I don't have discernment about how actually there's not just 3 options. Those are the ones that I thought before I became more aware, before I had more discernment. Now, all of a sudden, with more discernment, those aren't just 3 options or 3 choices in front of me. Now, that becomes a 4th potential, or a 5th option, or a 6th choice. Your spectrum of options open up the more you have discernment. Because discernment causes creativity, so it opens up the field of creative possibilities to emerge. Because now it's going beyond the particle state and it's accessing the quantum field of superposition. So the less aware we are, the more predetermined our choices will be, because we won't perceive so many different options and we won't align with any of those different timelines. And that's why when everything is predetermined, it's also predictable. And that's the default settings of this reality. We start off with our karma, and we start off with the predetermined present, past, and future version of everything. And from those default settings, now it is up to us to either nurture and cultivate discernment, or to stay inside the endless cycle of involution and evolution. In fact, the high-level Rosicrucian, Rudolf Steiner, said that not only is free will necessary for our evolution, it is the force that we call the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is known as the feminine principle of subjectivity. Without the subjectivity of our free will, we will remain in objective reality. We need an impulse created sheerly from our own subjective meaning to move us into a higher timeline. And our free will does not mean our conscious waking life, immediate moment, choice, or action, because everything leading up to that immediate choice action was something that was given into the subconscious at an earlier time and developed a feedback loop with our conscious mind. And that's still free will. Every possibility within this third dimension of time-space already exists. So it's not about creating that. It's about aligning with it. Your free will creates alignment with timelines. It creates alignment with timelines that are completely different based off of your ability to become more conscious and more awakened. Because the more awakened we are, the more we're able to access completely different timelines. That's what they call in this age a quantum leap. A quantum leap simply means that you are making, with your free will, such a vastly different decision, action, or choice than you would have made. And so quantum leaping is what's known as us becoming more energy than matter. Once we start vibrating in more energy and less matter, meaning predetermined, so once we start opening up the field of what's available to us and becoming conscious of all of the decisions, actions, and choices we can make, that's becoming more energy and less matter. Matter just means that we were on that same timeline the entire time, and it's so predetermined that it's predictable. But once we start becoming more conscious, we start becoming less predictable. Less predictable is a quantum leap. That's what they call a quantum leap. But what I'm calling unpredictability. And that's because you would have to, in order to make that quantum leap, make choices so far out of what is predetermined and predictable for you. And so in order to do that, you would have to have enough awareness and enough discernment to be able to make a quantum leap. That's also why the more conscious you become, the harder it is to read your future. The less aware you are and the less conscious you are more predictable because you are in, literally, the realm of predeterminism. So you're easily predictable and your future will be easily predicted. But the more free will you access, your potential and your future starts changing vastly. So you start opening up your access to even more options. And then from there, you start opening it up to even more options. The energy field of a person who's becoming more and more conscious starts becoming more and more creative, because there's so much more potential that can be accessed. So that opening up of free will actually opened up more creativity. And that's why creativity is known as the random variable, or it's known as chaos. So you have chaos, which is what we call free will, which is also what we call random variables, that are meant to create alongside with predeterminism, or what we call fate, or what we call karma. So you see, these two forces actually aren't oppositional to one another. They're ones that co-create the creativity that is opened up in our energy field from having more potentials available to us and more timelines available to us, the more conscious we become, is done and is accessed through the parameters of our epigenetics and how much of that we access. It's done through our karma. It's done through the filter of our own consciousness and whatever was predetermined. So predeterminism doesn't cancel out free will. Predeterminism is simply the default settings that free will now has to operate from. But within operating inside of predeterminism, the more we're able to recognize our options, become more aware, and therefore align with higher choices and higher timelines through that feedback loop, that's what's called free will, not morphing into a kangaroo, ninja, giraffe. Free will is not just a figment of our imagination. It is a law inside this reality. It is known as the law of confusion, because only through us having the veils of not knowing what the truth actually is, will we be able to have free will. So we have to be confused. We have to not know so that our actions and our choices have the probability to become spontaneous. If we were to know everything at this layer of reality and have the truth, whatever that may be, at this layer of reality, fully comprehended and aware of, there would be no point to this dimension. This dimension is specifically for us to play out the choices and the options and the challenges and the struggles so that we can align with whatever we believe or whatever truth is or evolution. All of these things we have the option to have and be in alignment with because we have free will. So you can also look at free will as being the variable that is most important for evolution. Because if you were to not have that kernel, that seed of free will available to you, then you wouldn't be able to even evolve. You would just have everything here laid out before you, so there'd be no necessity for any sort of evolution, aka any sort of growth, and any sort of struggle for truth, struggle for knowledge, for awareness. So from that sense, the law of confusion, aka free will, is how we become more evolved. TLDR, there is always going to be patterns within reality. Free will is how we align with more positive patterns. I hope this has helped you become less predictable. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakening. See you next time.